November 9, 1939. Occupied Poland. A 22-year-old soldier sits on an ammunition crate in a frozen field camp. He is not writing home to ask for food. He is not asking for warm socks. He is not asking about his family. He writes, "It's tough out here. Today I'm writing mainly to ask for some Pervitin." 6 months later, same soldier, different front. He writes again, "Perhaps you could obtain some more Pervitin so that I can have a backup supply." 2 months after that, "If at all possible, please send me some more Pervitin." Read those 3 letters in sequence. Watch the language shift. The first is casual. The second says, backup supply. The third says, if at all possible. That is not preference. That is dependency. That is a uniformed soldier of the German Wehrmacht begging his civilian parents to mail him methamphetamine through official military post because the army that gave it to him could no longer supply enough. That soldier's name was Heinrich Böll. He would survive the war. He would win the Nobel Prize in Literature. But in 1939, he was something else entirely. He was proof that the Wehrmacht had turned its own army into addicts. And here is what nobody tells you about this story. Böll was not the exception. He was the norm. What you are about to hear is how a 3-milligram pill helped conquer France in 46 days, and then destroyed the army that swallowed it. Stay with me, because at the 17-minute mark, I am going to show you what happened when they tried to build a stronger version of this pill and who they tested it on. That part of this story has never been covered properly on this platform. If you are looking for the kind of military analysis that treats you like an intelligence officer and not a tourist, you are in the right place. This is WW2 Off the Record. We go to the primary sources. We go to the archives. And we report what the evidence says, not what sounds dramatic. If that is what you expect from your history content, join this intelligence office by subscribing now. Situation report initiated. In 1937, a chemist named Fritz Hauschild at the Temmler pharmaceutical factory in Berlin developed an optimized method for producing methamphetamine. His motivation was the 1936 Olympics. He believed American athletes had used drugs to gain an edge. He wanted a German answer. Temmler launched the compound commercially in 1938 under the name Pervitin. 3 milligrams of methamphetamine hydrochloride per tablet, available without prescription at every pharmacy in Germany. Now here is what that pill actually does inside a soldier's brain, and why every general in Berlin wanted it. Methamphetamine crosses the blood-brain barrier faster than standard amphetamine. Once inside, it forces a massive simultaneous release of 3 neurotransmitters: dopamine, which generates the feeling of invincibility; norepinephrine, which locks the body into combat-level alertness without any actual threat; and serotonin, which suppresses fear and anxiety. The combined effect: no fatigue, no hunger, no fear, elevated confidence, and a subjective sense that you can do anything, for 8 to 11 hours. For a military built around Blitzkrieg, around speed and shock, that is not just useful. That is what I classify as a pharmacological force multiplier, a pill that eliminates sleep and fear from the battlefield equation. But here is what nobody in Berlin modeled. Those 3 neurotransmitter systems are connected. Flood all 3 simultaneously, repeatedly, and you do not get sustained enhancement. You get what I call neurological debt. The receptors downregulate. The reserves deplete. Each cycle of use and crash leaves the brain less capable than before. The interest rate on that debt is catastrophic, and the Wehrmacht was about to take out the largest pharmacological loan in military history. I want you to keep something in mind as we go through this. I'm going to ask you at the end, at what point did the force multiplier become the force destroyer? Was it France? Was it Russia? Or was it baked into the chemistry from day one? Start forming your assessment now. Before the military got involved, Pervitin was a consumer product. Temmler hired one of Berlin's top advertising agencies and modeled the campaign after Coca-Cola. Students used it for exams. Night workers used it for endurance. Housewives consumed it for daytime energy. The Hildebrand Chocolate Company manufactured candy laced with 15 milligrams of methamphetamine per piece, marketed with images of smiling German women. For reference, a standard street dose of crystal meth today is 15 to 20 milligrams. Those chocolates were delivering a full hit in candy form. By 1939, 1.5 million tablets per month were being produced for civilian use alone. German universities ran studies. Every researcher reported positive findings. Many of them were taking the drug themselves while writing their reports. Nobody modeled addiction. Nobody studied long-term damage. Nobody classified it as a drug. An entire nation treated methamphetamine as a strong cup of coffee. But this did not happen by accident. Germany had built the global pharmaceutical industry. Before World War I, German chemical corporations held a worldwide monopoly on advanced drug synthesis. The company Bayer synthesized both aspirin and heroin within a 10-day window. At launch, Bayer's internal assessment favored heroin as the more promising product. They recommended it for children's sleep problems. That is the baseline. A country where pharmaceutical chemistry was not a niche industry. It was a national identity. During the Weimar Republic, the 1920s, drug consumption was woven into everyday Berlin life. Morphine as a social sedative, cocaine fueling the nightlife. These were not underground activities. They were normalized. Germany's drug laws were among the most permissive in Europe. Now, here is where it gets contradictory. When the Nazi regime took power in 1933, their public posture was explicitly anti-drug. Hitler positioned himself as the embodiment of purity. He stated on the record, "We don't need weak people. We want only the strong." Drug users were sent to concentration camps. But the regime drew a distinction that has no pharmacological basis. They separated drugs that made you weak from drugs that made you strong. Opium was weakness. Methamphetamine was strength. In the Nazi framework, Pervitin was not a drug. It was a tool that made a strong person stronger. That ideological loophole allowed the regime to maintain its anti-drug rhetoric while presiding over the largest state-sponsored stimulant program in history. A government defined by biological purity would become the most pharmacologically dependent military apparatus in modern history. And that is the ecosystem into which the Wehrmacht walked. The infrastructure was built. The social acceptance was established. The ideological exemption was in place. When the military placed its first bulk order, it was not introducing something new. It was scaling something that Germany had already normalized and that Nazi ideology had quietly exempted from its own rules. The man who brought Pervitin into the military was Dr. Otto Friedrich Ranke, Director of Defense Physiology Research at the Berlin Academy of Military Medicine. Ranke tested it on 90 university students. He documented heightened focus, increased confidence, suppressed hunger, and eliminated need for sleep. He wrote in his official report, "An excellent substance for rousing a weary squad." Ranke himself was a daily user. His diary records work sessions of 36 to 50 hours without sleep. The compound was field-tested during the invasion of Poland in September 1939. It worked, but Poland was a limited trial. The full deployment came next. In April of 1940, the German High Command issued the Stimulant Decree. This was an official military directive codifying the dosage protocol. 2 tablets at the start of operations, 1 more at 12 hours, 1 more at 24 hours. Between April and July of 1940, more than 35 million Pervitin doses were manufactured and distributed to Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe personnel. 833,000 tablets per day at peak production. The troops gave it their own names. Luftwaffe pilots called them Stuka tablets. Others called them Hermann Göring pills, a sarcastic reference to the Luftwaffe commander's own substance problems. Tank crews received methamphetamine-laced chocolate called Panzerschokolade. Pilots got Fliegerschokolade. When a substance acquires sarcastic nicknames inside an army, two things have happened. It has been normalized, and its risks are being dismissed. Both conditions were met. What happened next is the most dramatic demonstration of chemical warfare, not against the enemy, but conducted by an army upon itself. May 10, 1940. German forces launched the Western Offensive. The plan requires something that Allied intelligence had calculated was physically impossible: a continuous mechanized advance through the Ardennes Mountains without stopping to sleep. The Allied calculation was simple: any army must halt at night in mountainous terrain. That creates windows for defense. The German plan eliminated those windows entirely. The advance would not stop. Sedan was to be reached in 3 days and 3 sleepless nights. And here is a detail that crystallizes the pharmaceutical dimension of this war. On the same day German forces crossed the border, 3,500 trucks loaded with red wine were heading to supply French troops in Belgium. Wine was the French army's sanctioned stimulant, 3/4 of a liter per soldier per day, a holdover from World War I. The contrast is almost absurd. On one side, 3 million men fueled by methamphetamine, advancing without sleep. On the other, an army receiving daily wine rations in quantities that impaired judgment. This was the first pharmacological arms race in military history. And for those critical first weeks, the side with the better chemistry won. Wehrmacht soldiers marched and fought for 10 consecutive days, 22 miles per day. France fell in 46 days. General Guderian reportedly told his men, "I ordered you not to sleep for 48 hours. You kept going for 17 days. That figure is almost certainly inflated. No human stays awake 17 days, even on methamphetamine. But the perception inside German command was that something superhuman had been achieved, and that perception locked them into a dependency cycle. If the drug won France, then the drug would be needed for Russia, and the next campaign, and the next. But did the drug actually win France? Historian James Holland conducted a physical replication. He assembled subjects who marched 22 miles under 60 pounds of gear using only caffeine. They completed the distance. His conclusion: German training, doctrine, and Allied incompetence contributed more than the pills. Pervitin was an operational lubricant. It reduced friction in a machine that was already well built. That distinction matters because it means the Wehrmacht won France through superior tactics. The drug made an effective force marginally more effective in the short term. And then it began to destroy that same force from inside. I want your take on this. If Holland is right, and the Wehrmacht could have won France without the drug, then the entire Pervitin program was an unforced error. 35 million doses of a compound they did not actually need. Drop your assessment below. To understand how a performance enhancer becomes a performance destroyer, you need to understand the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. This is the decision cycle that governs all military operations. The side that cycles faster wins. Methamphetamine accelerates one phase, act. Soldiers execute with less hesitation, less fear, less physical limitation, but it destroys the other three: observe, orient, and decide. The phases where judgment lives. The drug induces tunnel vision. The soldier charges a machine gun nest but cannot assess whether the charge is tactically sound. A driver operates a vehicle for 48 hours, but his spatial awareness has degraded below safe thresholds. A staff officer processes paperwork all night, but his strategic judgment has been replaced by chemical fixation. If you accelerate act while degrading observe, orient, and decide, you have not enhanced the cycle. you have broken it. You have created an army that moves fast but moves poorly, attacks aggressively but attacks the wrong targets, consolidates but cannot adapt. The medical reports confirmed it. After France, Wehrmacht commanders documented fights between soldiers, accidents from impaired judgment, physical abuse of subordinates, violence against officers, and sexual crimes. General von Brauchitsch concluded his own troops were committing what he called most serious infractions of discipline. The identified cause? Substance abuse. And then came the crash. When the drug wears off, the biological debt arrives. Severe cognitive impairment, physical exhaustion, emotional instability. In many cases, complete inability to function for 24 to 48 hours. Contemporary military reports described post-Pervitin soldiers as looking, and I quote, more like zombies than great warriors. The drug that was designed to create a super soldier was creating a force that could sprint but could not sustain, that could attack but could not think, and that was eating its own operational cohesion from within. If you are following this analysis and you see the pattern of institutional self-destruction through pharmacological overreach, this is what we do at WW2 Off the Record. Every briefing is this detailed. If you have not yet subscribed, now is the time. We are about to enter the operational morgue. What I am about to describe is the darkest chapter of this story, and it starts with soldiers choosing to die in the snow. But first, Berlin tried to stop it. The Reich health leader, Leonardo Conti, recognized the crisis. In 1941, he succeeded in placing Pervitin under the opium law, prescription only. Military distribution tightened. Soldiers were to receive only a few tablets at a time. The policy had almost no effect. Civilian production actually increased year over year. 7.5 million tablets in 41, 9 million in 42, 8 million in 44. You cannot withdraw a chemical that your army has built into its operational planning without providing an alternative capability. And no alternative existed. When official supply tightened, soldiers built their own networks. Pills were traded, stockpiled, acquired through family. Böll's letters were not unusual. They were representative of an entire army using civilian channels to maintain drug intake. The prohibition failed because the system it was trying to regulate had already become dependent on the substance it was trying to restrict, and the army became operationally split into two states: chemically enhanced and chemically depleted. Units with access to Pervitin could perform. Units without could not. The same soldier was functional on the drug and worse than useless 12 hours after the crash. An army oscillating between those two states is not being enhanced. It is being destabilized. Then came Barbarossa, June 1941. The Eastern Front imposed conditions that no Western campaign had approached. Minus 40 degrees, thousands of kilometers, supply lines beyond their limits. Pervitin consumption escalated beyond anything previously recorded. But the function had changed. In France, the drug enabled offensive speed. In Russia, it was being used to prevent soldiers from lying down in the snow and choosing to freeze to death. A field commander's archived report captures it. He found his men lying in the snow, surrendering to cold and exhaustion. He wrote, "When they started laying in the snow to let themselves die, I decided to give them Pervitin. After half an hour, they spontaneously started telling me they were feeling better." Read that again. The treatment for physiological collapse was more of the compound causing the collapse. That is the feedback loop of institutional dependency. When you use a drug to maintain minimum function instead of achieving peak performance, withdrawal no longer means returning to normal. Withdrawal means collapse. The biological cost was now visible everywhere. Heart failure from sustained cardiovascular overload. Psychosis, documented in approximately 2/3 of chronic users, manifesting as paranoia, hallucinations, and complete detachment from reality. Wehrmacht medical reports designated this Pervitin fever. Soldiers experiencing psychotic episodes committed suicide at documented rates. These were not combat casualties. These were pharmacologically manufactured deaths. And the most insidious damage was invisible. Chronic methamphetamine use destroys dopamine terminals in the brain. It impairs learning. It degrades processing speed. It compromises motor function. Primate studies show that recovery takes a minimum of 6 months under optimal conditions. There were no optimal conditions on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht was fighting a war on 2 fronts that nobody in the high command acknowledged. One against the Allies, one against the pharmacological consequences of its own enhancement program. And on that second front, there was no possibility of victory. But Berlin's response was not to stop. It was to build something worse. By 1944, Vice Admiral High requested a compound that could keep soldiers fighting beyond any normal limit. A pharmacology team in Kiel delivered D9, 5 milligrams of oxycodone, 5 milligrams of cocaine, and 3 milligrams of methamphetamine, in one pill. They tested it on prisoners at Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Inmates were forced to march carrying 44-pound packs under the drug's influence, day after day until they collapsed. Nazi records indicate subjects covered up to 55 miles in a single day. From chocolates for housewives to concentration camp endurance trials, in 6 years. That is the trajectory of pharmacological enhancement pursued without a single ethical constraint. And here is the part that completes the picture. The dependency was not limited to the enlisted ranks. Hitler's personal physician, Theodor Morell, administered approximately 800 injections across the war years. The substance list escalated exactly as addiction science predicts. Vitamins became hormones. Hormones became stimulants. Stimulants became opioids. By 1943, Morell was injecting Hitler with Eucodol, the same oxycodone compound found in D9. Before a critical meeting with Mussolini in July 43, Morell injected Hitler with his first recorded Eucodol dose. Hitler, who had been physically depleted, spoke for hours without stopping. Mussolini, who had come to negotiate Italy's exit from the war, never got a word in. He sat mopping his forehead while a chemically revitalized Hitler dominated the room. Every strategic decision Hitler made from mid-1943 onward, every order to hold untenable positions, every refusal to withdraw, was filtered through a neurochemistry being manipulated by a physician with no oversight and no understanding of the consequences. The supreme commander of the Wehrmacht was making decisions that determined the fate of millions while his brain chemistry was being artificially destabilized. The head of the snake was chemically compromised, and every order that flowed from that compromised head impacted every soldier on every front. By spring 1945, Morell could no longer source the compounds. Hitler almost certainly entered withdrawal in his final weeks. The tremors, the paranoia, the rigidity, popularly attributed to Parkinson's. The pharmacological evidence says chronic drug dependency was, at minimum, a significant factor. Now, analytical integrity requires one more piece of context. The Wehrmacht was not the only army using stimulants. The British used Benzedrine. Eisenhower ordered 500,000 tablets for North Africa. The RAF officially sanctioned amphetamine use in 1941. The difference was institutional control. Allied programs maintained tighter oversight, more conservative dosing, and earlier recognition of addiction risk. More critically, the Allies never built their doctrine around the assumption that soldiers would be chemically enhanced. Benzedrine was a supplement for exceptional circumstances. The Wehrmacht issued a formal Stimulant Decree that integrated Pervitin into the operational plan. When your doctrine assumes the drug, removing the drug breaks the doctrine. The Allies never made that structural error. Both sides incurred a pharmacological debt, but the Wehrmacht's debt was orders of magnitude larger. So, did Germany's super soldier drug destroy more divisions than Allied bombs? The honest answer: it cannot be quantified with precision. There is no database separating Pervitin casualties from combat casualties. But here is what the evidence confirms. The drug created addiction that undermined unit cohesion. It caused cardiac deaths that subtracted combat power without any enemy action. It triggered psychotic breakdowns that turned soldiers against their own. It permanently degraded the cognitive capacity of every sustained user. It made the Army's effectiveness contingent on a supply chain that could be disrupted, and it chemically compromised the Supreme Commander making every strategic decision. The Wehrmacht was not defeated solely by Allied firepower. It was also destroyed by a chemical debt it could not pay. A debt denominated in damaged brains, broken hearts, and an army that could no longer observe, orient, decide, or act. The regime that proclaimed biological superiority optimized its soldiers with a compound that destroyed the very biology it claimed to exalt. The same men who conquered France in 46 days ended the war writing desperate letters home, begging for more pills. And Heinrich Böll, the 22-year-old soldier from the cold open? He survived. He came home. He wrote. And in 1972, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. But his wartime letters remained in the archives. Letters from a young man writing to his parents, not about the horrors of combat, but about the 3-milligram pill he could not function without. After the surrender, Pervitin did not disappear. It remained available in Germany by prescription until 1988. Both East and West German armed forces stockpiled it. American forces used it in Vietnam. The pharmacological legacy of Nazi military science did not end with the fall of Berlin. It metastasized. And for the veterans who came home addicted, there was almost no understanding of what to do with them. The Wehrmacht used them, broke them, and the post-war system abandoned them. The full human cost extended decades beyond the surrender. The lesson is not that drugs are bad. The lesson is that pharmacological shortcuts carry compound interest. The biological debt always comes due. And when it comes due across an entire army, no external enemy needs to inflict the damage. You are already doing it to yourself. That is the declassified assessment. Now, I want yours. Where was the tipping point? The Stimulant Decree? Barbarossa? Or was it baked into the chemistry from the first Temmler tablet? Do not give me opinions. Give me your analysis. Best assessment gets pinned. If this is the standard of military history you expect, subscribe and hit that notification bell. There are more files on the desk, and they are all this detailed. This has been a WVWV2 off the record intelligence brief. Dismissed.